Thank you so much for being here, Mr. Stronsky, and having the conversation with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan, while referring to the absence of agenda in Armenian-American relations, in a way blamed the U.S., the country advocating democracy and promoting democratic principles and values around the world, for not responding accordingly to the Velvet Revolution in Armenia. Do you think it's an accurate description of the stance the U.S. has taken with regards to the events that took place in Armenia last April? What is the opinion of the U.S. establishment on the Velvet Revolution and the processes that followed overall?
I think that's probably an unfair characterization. I know the Velvet Revolution surprised everyone. I think it surprised people in Armenia. It surprised people in the United States. And I know that immediately after the Velvet Revolution, I was asked to go to multiple government agencies in the United States and ask them to brief on what they thought, or what I thought Armenia could use and what types of assistance they could use. And from what I understand, a lot of that assistance has come. It hasn't come very flashy, but from what I understand, the United States has actually been one of the largest donors in assistance since then. It might not be exactly as large as what the Prime Minister had hoped, but I think this is a continual process. And it takes time for governments to react. The United States is very often much faster than our European counterparts. So I actually think a lot of this is happening, and it will continue to happen, particularly once the Prime Minister sets up his agenda. He set up a very nice vision for Armenia, but now he needs to prioritize how he's going to implement that vision, and then it will be a lot easier for Armenia's friends and partners around the world to figure out how to tailor their assistance to that vision. This needs to be an Armenian-driven process, so Armenia needs to decide where they want to have the reforms. The United States should not come in and tell Armenia, but once Armenia makes those decisions, then I think there'll be even greater cooperation. But I think it's not quite fair to blame the United States, because this has to be, the Velvet Revolution was an Armenian bottom-up driven process, and I think the reform agenda for Armenia also needs to have that similar approach, and then the Armenia's partners around the world can then tailor their assistance. What I think the U.S. has done, it's been very quick, it's been very immediate assistance in the immediate aftermath, but now is the big difficult job. You've had a transition of power, and that's very wonderful. But transition of power also needs to be followed by transition of the system, and I think that's still what needs to be done. And I think the Armenian government and the Armenian people should be the ones to make those decisions, and the international community can assist, and the United States will assist in those. But I think this has to be an Armenian-driven decision, and when the Armenians are clear on what their priorities are, then the U.S. can help tailor to those issues.
Which issues are the most important and pressing ones in the Armenian-American relations at the moment, and what hinders their development in your opinion? Do you think there is a possibility of qualitative change or improvement in our relations in the foreseeable future? Well,
I generally think that I've studied Armenia for almost 20 years, been coming here for many years, been worked in the U.S. government, not under the Trump administration, but previous administrations, working on Armenia-related issues as well. And I think the relationship has been actually quite positive. The United States recognizes Armenia's unique geographic position and the unique security challenges that Armenia faces. And I don't think the United States has any expectation of needing to reorient that, but we've had a very transactional partnership. We've had some, despite the sort of the security reliance on Russia. We've had actually a quite positive military-to-military engagement, working alongside each other in peacekeeping operations in Kosovo, Afghanistan, and the United States appreciates peacekeeping operations in some other parts of the world that Armenia has participated in over the long term. I think there's quite robust cultural ties between the two countries. I think the Armenian diaspora in the United States sort of helped center that, but I was just at a very wonderful exhibit in New York all about Armenian art. It was one of the hottest exhibits in New York City, and it was fabulous. And I think the events in Armenia over the past year has sort of refocused American public's attention on Armenia, and I think the events, the changes that are here probably added even more enthusiasm to people who were running to that exhibit in New York to see. And when I was there, it was packed. So I do think there is certain a lot of chances to sort of continue this partnership. I think both sides need to be careful about not making mistakes and not sending wrong signals. I do know that some people in Washington are concerned about a recent deployment of troops to Syria, and that is unfortunate from an American perspective, because it's a perception that they could be used in possibly against people that have been helpful to the United States in that conflict.
We'll come to that.
But I think these are issues that can be worked out, but I know that you said that the former president had some concerns about the U.S., and I think the U.S. also has some concerns about some things that have happened here in the last recently.
I have asked because some experts think that the relations of Armenia with the U.S. and generally Armenia's relations with the West have hit a new low. The same holds true about the Armenia-EU relations, as they think. What do you think is the main reason? Is it the stress that Armenia puts on the Armenia-Russia relations, continuing the isolationism in the foreign policy? And what does the West think of the Armenia-Russia relations in general?
Well, I think the West, we generally understand the Armenia, at least those who look at and study Armenia, understand Armenia's unique geographic location. It's a very difficult environment that you have with very many challenging neighbors. And we understand, that those orient your country to having a close, political and security relationship with Russia. I don't think anybody in the United States expects Armenia to have to choose. I don't think Armenia should choose between one or the other. I think the trajectory, your government traditionally has been able to balance, a good relationship and sort of have that multipolar foreign policy, and I think that's the intention of this new government as well. But I think it's a more challenging world than it was just a few years ago. We have a United States that has a lot of political problems at home, and I think that just detracts some attention. We have a European Union that is struggling with Brexit, and then we also have a very difficult U.S.-Russian relationship, which I think also complicates a lot of things for Armenia as well, not to mention the difficult U.S.-Iranian relationship. Right. It's a difficult environment that your diplomats and your government has to face. But I think focusing in on sort of some of the positive aspects of our relationship over the long term is certainly a place that can be done. You asked about American views towards Armenia and sort of the new Armenia. Right. Armenia is very far from the United States. I think it took me about 20 hours to get here a few days ago. Armenia is, and the Caucasus region is an important region for the United States, but the United States has many other problems closer to home that it is focusing on, and that's a lot of some of the issues that are complicating our engagement. I personally believe it would be great to have greater connections, people to people, government to government. I think you have a new government now. You have new ministers. They've been in their jobs for a while, and I hope that they'll be able to have greater interaction. But also, I think your government also needs to figure out what its approach is and what its policies are, I don't necessarily think that they're not getting the attention that Armenia deserves. I think the European Union has tried to step up its assistance. You had Angela Merkel, I know, has had.
She's been here.
She's been here. Your prime minister has been to Brussels, and I know they at least had a short engagement with our president. Right. So I think some of these things are happening, but there's got to be a lot of legwork. I worked in the Obama administration. I also worked in the Bush administration, and I helped set up a lot of senior level engagements. And at least on the U.S. side, they want to have a lot of substance, and they want to know, what the have not just a quick meeting, but a really substantive meeting, and it takes time to develop that agenda. And so I think as your government determines that agenda, right. I think there are other that is all quite possible. I do think that many Americans, and I personally, find some bright spots in what happened in Armenia. We're seeing a world that is becoming more authoritarian, more complicated, and what happened in Armenia is an example that the world is not fully going towards authoritarianism, and there is some countries going the other way, and I think many Americans welcome that, and many Americans feel that it's a good sign that civil society can be empowered and can act. So I'm very hopeful for a lot of the changes that are coming here. I hope to see some greater institutionalization of some of those changes. I think those are very, very important to making sure that this is a long-standing change and to sort of really solidify the changes that have been happened here, and that's something that I hope will happen in the coming months and coming years.
You've talked about Syria and the mission that we have sent to Syria, and it is considered as another significant area of confrontation. As Armenia initiated a humanitarian mission that was perceived in the West as a deployment in support of Russian military operations in the Syrian theater. Although Armenia has announced that first of all it aimed at ensuring the physical security of our compatriots living there, and second of all the security of people living in Syria, and represented a purely humanitarian move. Do you think Armenia should have abstained from sending this mission to Syria?
Well, Armenia makes its decisions, and I don't know. I can't second guess Armenian decisions. What I can do is I can tell you how it is perceived in the United States. And there is a perception that Russia has been propping up a very bad regime in the Assad regime that has used chemical weapons against its own people, it's strange to have a pro-democratic, pro-Western looking oriented government to make a big foreign policy move like that. So it is a very mixed signal to send to the United States. The United States has also had troops and have had people that they've trained in Syria, and those troops were attacked by Russian mercenaries a year ago. So support, that there's concerns about the security of both the people we've trained and also American soldiers on the ground. And I think the combination of those two make it not appear, make it unfortunate decision right now, because I think it does send the wrong signals to the United States, and it does raise a lot of concern. And as somebody who is a friend of Armenia and it tries to sort of enhance, create platforms and opportunities for Armenians who are in Washington to, talk about issues, it makes my job a little bit harder to do that. I'm very happy to hear from your government officials that this is a strictly humanitarian mission, that is one focused on civilians, that is one focused in on civilian demining, but I think the communication and how it was presented, it might have been done a little bit better, because that aspect came almost after the fact, and so I just think perhaps the way it was rolled out was also was also unfortunate.
Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan has announced that by sending this mission to Syria, he's trying to pay back the debt we owe to Syrians since the Armenian Genocide of 1915, as Syrians have provided with help and shelter the survivors of the Armenian Genocide back then. Actually, this was the one of the main reasons.
Yes, I mean, I understand that, and I think there are many Americans who are very supportive of those who provided assistance to Armenians around the world historically during the genocide, and so I think we understand that. But as I said, at a time when there's very difficult U.S.-Russian relations and there's a lot of concern about the safety of the people that are deployed in Syria. Right. It just sends a difficult message, and I think the United States, we also know that you worked very hard to keep your diplomatic mission there open to provide assistance to the population in Aleppo, and I think we understand that, we appreciate that, but the timing of this deployment, given a lot of what has happened, particularly over Syria, and the disagreements between Russia and the United States over Syria, particularly over the past year, I think just make it a challenging issue that has to be resolved between the two countries. I do think it can be resolved. I think there's a lot of goodwill towards Armenia, both as a people, as a culture, and as this new government figures out how it is wanting to reform and bring reform here. So I think there is certainly a lot of prospects for greater cooperation, but this is an unfortunate way to start. But I think it
can be overcome.
It can be overcome, and as I said, there's a lot of people, there's a lot of excitement in the United States about the changes, and there's been a lot of focus on Armenia in a way that I haven't seen in the United States by some of the mainstream press. The United States tends to look more inward, and it tends to look more towards the regions, right. Other regions. But over the past year, there's been a lot of coverage on Armenia and the changes that have come here, and most of it has been quite positive. So I think so there are positive views for Armenia, and I think we need to build on some of those, and that's what I hope will happen.
Okay, coming to another question. During his visit to Armenia, George Kent promised that although Washington has already provided Armenia with 14 million USD in additional aid after the change of government in 2018, further support will be provided for the Armenian government's anti-corruption efforts and programs to diversify the Armenia's economy, including a focus on improving the country's investment climate. Is there a chance the United States might provide substantial financial aid to Armenia? What do you reckon? I specifically refer to the Millennium Challenges Program or the possible investment of 8 billion USD in energy block in Armenia, as announced by the ex-ambassador of the United States, Richard Mills.
Well, I don't work for the U.S. government, and I have no clear insights into what the U.S. government is thinking. But I certainly, do expect, a senior official of the state coming from Washington, the State Department, wouldn't say that unless there was, plans to have some additional assistance. And as I said, I think a lot of that assistance is wants to figure out what Armenia wants, and how, the ideas Armenia has for improving its investor climate. climate. I think that is certainly an area that needs to be worked on. I think particularly investor climate for smaller and medium businesses, both for people in Armenia to create their own new small and medium-sized businesses, but also in other countries that I've studied that has really helped, jumpstart economies, create jobs. It's the big, investments that everyone, talks about because those are the ones that look really great in figures, but very often it's the smaller-based investment that actually is helping bring prosperity. So I think, that's a very obvious place where I think the U.S. and Armenia could cooperate. Okay. And I would expect that if George Kent said that there are plans to increase that.
The assistance
to Armenia. I think there are some challenges. I mean, I think Armenia has a lot of friends on Congress who will try to make sure there's money spent. But we have an administration now that is trying to cut funding for government spending at the same time. And so I think this is going to be a give and take. But I do expect that additional funds will most likely be coming to support some of those initiatives.
Okay, and one last question. It will regard Karabakh issue. How would you assess the present state of the negotiation process over NagornoKarabakh, taking into account that Prime Minister Pashinyan has been adamant on Artsakh being restored as a negotiating party? Also, he announced that the Madrid principles for a peaceful settlement of the Artsakh conflict should be reviewed by both sides. Don't you think that Madrid principles have become obsolete a long time ago, since the world is not static? It evolves, so is the conflict. Should the sides stick to the Madrid principles, in your opinion, or wouldn't it be better to replace them with more viable set of principles that would address the challenges both sides face at the moment?
Thankfully, I'm not a policymaker anymore, so I don't have to come up with the new solutions that are that can be on the table. I think right now, the international community and the Minsk group is trying to sort of gauge what the new geopolitical situation and the sort of political situation is between the two countries. We have a very different Armenian government, and I think the Aliyev, President Aliyev in Azerbaijan himself is trying to figure out how this format will work. There is, nobody likes change, and this is the format that's been worked out, and I'm not advocating that it won't work, but I think there are taking a look at things with new eyes. I think that's something that always should be done. I think very often, the solution to this conflict, the Minsk group, the international community can help out, but the solution, the ultimate solution to this conflict is between Armenia and Azerbaijan, and figuring out a way to assist them to make that solution, I think, is positive. But I'm not sure I see the signs, honestly, that we're any more closer than we were a few years ago to doing it. So, if anybody has great ideas, I think they should be put out on the table, because this is a conflict that has been going on for way too long, and it's a conflict that people die from. And I think here in Armenia and in Azerbaijan, that is much more visible to you than it is visible to me sitting in Washington. But it's clear that this happens, and it happens every year. Some years are worse than others. And I think the experience of 2016 sort of indicates that it is combustible, and it will be very bloody if it does go out. Right. So I hope that it won't. I dearly hope that it won't, and that they can find a solution. But I think this is a solution that has to be found between Armenia and Azerbaijan, and the international community can assist. And I think it's positive that discussions between Prime Minister Pashinyan and President Aliyev are ongoing. I think it's important that they get to know each other, that they get to have a working relationship with each other. I understand, some of Pashinyan's new approach is not welcome in Azerbaijan, and that's a problem. But I think having discussions and keeping that process going, I think, is very important, simply because lives depend on it, and this isn't just a diplomatic engagement. This is something that is far more substantive than that, because it is about the fate of people. It's about the fate of countries, and it is about the lives of people, both soldiers on both sides who are sons of parents who love them, right. And trying to make sure that they are safe, and this is not going to blow up, I think is important. So anything that can be done, any way that the United States, the international community can help in that. But I do think this is something that has to come from within Armenia and from within Azerbaijan. I don't see sadly that right now, but I remain hopeful, I welcome any outside thinking outside the box, because maybe there is a solution that nobody's thought about, that I hope that this gets resolved peacefully, and that until that has happened, that the violence can be sustained and calmed down, so this doesn't so no more innocent lives are lost.
Okay, thank you so much,
Thank you.
Mr. Stransky.